Dear viewers, welcome to this episode of Unmute. Unmute के ये एपिसोड में आप सब लोगों का स्वागत है। आज के एपिसोड में हम आमतौर पर जो बदलती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था, वो अर्थव्यवस्था में कामगार वर्ग का, लेबर का क्या भूमिका रही है, उसमें क्या परिवर्तन हो रहे हैं, अभी अभी जो संसद में पारित हुए लेबर कोड्स के बारे में बात करेंगे, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस के बारे में बात करेंगे, गिग प्लेटफॉर्म्स और उसका जो परिणाम आ रहा है आमतौर पे एक पूरे इकोनॉमी में, एक लेबर के क्षेत्र में, उसके बारे में बात करेंगे, और एक फ्यूचर ऑफ वर्क कि काम की भूमिका आगे जाकर कैसे रहने वाली है। तो ये सब मुद्दे आज कवर करने के लिए हमारे साथ दो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट गेस्ट हैं। एक है प्रोफेसर अर्नेस्टो नरोना और दूसरी है अनुषा रविशंकर। तो गगन, आप अर्नेस्टो को बहुत सालों से पहचानते हैं, थोड़ी उनकी पहचान आप कर दीजिए।
बहुत सालों से तो नहीं, पर जितने सालों से पहचानता हूँ बहुत इंटेंसली पहचानता हूँ। बट वेलकम अर्नेस्टो। डॉक्टर अर्नेस्टो नरोना IIM में प्रोफेसर हैं, अहमदाबाद के IIM में। अगर पूरे विश्व में रिसर्च और लेबर स्टडीज की जब बात होती है तो आप देखेंगे, अगर पब्लिशिंग देखेंगे तो डॉक्टर अर्नेस्टो नरोना की बहुत सारी पब्लिकेशन वहाँ है। ये एथिकल बिजनेस और लेबर के साथ जो एक पूरी मैगजीन है, जर्नल है, उसको एडिट करते हैं। और मेरा व्यक्तिगत अनुभव है, ही इज सॉफ्ट स्पोकन, वेरी इंटेंस, बट वेरी कमिटेड टू द इशू ऑफ लेबर राइट्स। साथ ही साथ कुछ चीज़ें शायद मुझे पता है, कुछ दूसरों को, ही इज एन अमेजिंग फोटोग्राफर। ही हैज फोटोग्राफ्ड all the birds of IIM Ahmedabad. Wow. And there are many other spaces where Ernesto is known as a person to consult. He is with us in the social compact, in the company that we have registered. He is a director in that. So his commitment to as an academician to labor rights, his passion on LGBTQI, and he keeps going and finding out उनकी क्या हालत है। अभी भी ये चाइल्ड लेबर, बच्चा देखते हैं, कोई लिखता है, his heart goes out. So it's just not academics, he has the heart and head. Really, I'm so grateful, Ernesto, that you come to this episode of ours.
Thank you very much, Gagan.
Thanks, Gagan. Let me introduce Anusha Ravishankar. Anusha is trained as a lawyer. वो लेबर राइट्स में काम करती है, फ्रंट लाइन जिसको हम कहते हैं कि फ्रंट लाइन पे काम करते हैं, जहां अलग अलग सवाल, वो वेज थेफ्ट का सवाल हो, डिस्क्रिमिनेशन के सवाल हो, ये सभी मुद्दों पर वो काम करती है। इंडिया लेबर लाइन के साथ जुड़कर वो काम करती है। सेंटर फॉर सोशल जस्टिस CSJ के साथ जुड़कर काम करती है। बैंगलोर से मुझे लगता है कि वो एरिया से भी परे एक पूरे भारतवर्ष में ये क्या चल रहा है लेबर के संदर्भ में, उसके बारे में आप काम कर रही है। ट्रेनिंग की काम करते हैं, रिसर्च का काम करते हैं। तो आज का जो कॉम्बिनेशन है, इसमें एक एकेडमिक प्रैक्टिशनर और एक प्रैक्टिशनर रिसर्चर, ऐसा एक कॉम्बिनेशन आज के एपिसोड में हम लोग आपके सामने लेके आ रहे हैं अनम्यूट के एपिसोड में।
जनरेशनल
और अच्छा, वो भी है एक जनरेशनल अप्रोच भी इसमें, कि जो एक बहुत सालों से ये चीजों को देख रहे हैं और अभी गए कई दशकों से कोई प्रैक्टिस हो रही है उसमें। तो अर्नेस्टो, आपसे हम शुरुआत करते हैं। ये जो अभी भी न्यूज साइकिल में चल रहा है, लेबर कोड्स के बारे में जो बात है, एक गुट ऐसा है जो कहता है कि लेबर कोड वाज अ फाइनल पार्ट of the reform package which were launched in 1991. उसका एक फाइनल पीस था जो अभी तक फिट नहीं हुआ था, लेकिन लेबर कोड आने से वो फिट हो गया, कि that was like the last part of the package that got done. So आपका जो विश्लेषण है, आपकी जो समझ है कि ये लेबर कोड्स सच्चाई में किसके हित में किसको प्रोटेक्ट कर रहा है, कौन सी एक बाजू में इकोनॉमिक लिबरलाइजेशन के साथ उसका एक रिश्ता जो है, दूसरे बाजू में सच्चे में प्रोटेक्शन के संदर्भ में, क्योंकि एक वो भी बात है कि लेबर की प्रोटेक्शन और खास तौर पे गिग वर्कर जो नए ढंग की जो लेबर के फॉर्म्स आ रहे हैं उसमें उसको प्रोटेक्ट करेंगे, ऐसा एक माना जा रहा है, ऐसा एक कहा जा रहा है। तो आपकी ओवरऑल एनालिसिस क्या है लेबर कोड्स और अभी जो उसका आने वाले परिणामों को संदर्भ में?
मेरे ख्याल से तो ये जो लेबर कोड्स बेसिकली is meant to create precariousness and also weaken trade unions basically. इसमें प्रोटेक्शन की बात ही नहीं आती है। आप देखोगे लेबर कोड्स के जो प्रोविजंस है उसमें there is a increasing, the provisions provide for increasing amount of precariousness. One example is often quoted is कि जो provisions है उसमें for layoff, retrenchment, okay, and closure, उसको 100 से 300 किया है, ठीक है। और naturally, lot of industry, a lot of workers will left out. Those are below 300, correct? एक तो वो है. So that is related to precariousness. Also, उन्होंने fixed term employment. They have made provisions for fixed term employment. Now, fixed term employment means they are giving equivalent kind of, the benefits are equivalent to permanent workers. But वो एक साल के बाद वो आपको बोल सकते कि आप जा सकते हो. So एक तो है, so the fixed term employment is basically also creating precariousness. The other point which I made was basically about weakening trade unions, correct? So इसमें ये है कि उन्होंने कहा कि recognition of trade unions is provided by the labor code, which is a major problem since since independence. So recognition was leading to a lot of conflict and fights between unions. So उन्होंने कहा कि we are providing for recognition of trade unions. But whilst providing for recognition of trade unions, you're taking away the right to strike. Because now all industry is supposed to give notice of strike. And during that notice of strike, the dispute can be shifted to conciliation. Now, conciliation mein agar aap dispute jata hai, that means the strike can be illegal. So all strike can be made illegal. Previously, this provision was only linked to public utility services. अब वो सब industry को apply होता है. So that means almost all the strikes will be illegal. Now, when you're saying that these strikes are illegal, the labor code also says that the illegal strike means your registration as a union can be cancelled. Okay, so in effect, basically, there's you're strangulating the union movement in some sense. So in my view, it's meant to, these labor codes are basically meant to attract capital, attract investment. Basically, that's what. And if you see the whole trajectory of the labor codes, so August 2019, you had the wage code passed. Then in September 2020, all the other three codes were passed. Now, I'm not getting into how they were passed, but they were passed at that time. And since then, there was no notification for 5 years. Notification came in November 21st, 2025. And then the rules came out in, I think, December 30th, 2025. Now, if you look at the sequence of events and then you go and sign the FTA with EU, what is the message? The message is that we are, the labor codes were not relevant till the last 5 years, and suddenly they become relevant. You notify them, and you also have the rules framed, correct? So basically, it's meant to attract capital, and and there are, of course, if you look then at the whole issue of EU's emphasis on, collective bargaining, okay, those issues, then there's a contradiction over there because now collective bargaining in our context is completely done away with.
But Ernesto, मुझे नहीं समझ में आ रहा है ये बात. There's a lot of international pressure on ease of doing business and all these international investors saying तुम्हारे लेबर कोड बहुत ये है, लेबर लेजिस्लेशन बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है, हम नहीं इन्वेस्ट करते. बट उनके खुद के देश में द लेबर स्टैंडर्ड्स आर वेरी हाई. And we have then sort of collapsed the whole thing. So what is this polarity that is going on?
So basically, what I can see is that the ease of doing business, that is the World Bank, which has now given up the ranking. If you look at all those countries, in the top 10 countries, all their labor standards are very strict and implemented very strongly, correct? But, when it comes to our country, or either this is just an excuse that our labor standards are inflexible, we are inflexible. Though I don't agree with the whole inflexible argument. Because even when the codes were not passed and the earlier labor laws, you had flexibility. Flexibility in the sense there were closing mills, there were closure of mills that took place, for example, Bombay and Ahmedabad. There was no problem in closing those mills, and those were done on very spurious kind of reasons, correct? For example, you stop paying the electricity bills, and they come and cut off your electricity, and then your mill is closed, correct? Then you had a lot of outsourcing that took place. Yes. Okay, there was a ban on recruitment in permanent positions. So this whole thing of saying that our labor codes are very rigid, I don't think that holds. Okay, there was a lot of flexibility over there with the government not really, implementation was very poor, correct? So since the implementation was poor, flexibility was there. At least that's what I would think. The argument about our country being rigid and the West, standards being, now I don't know to what extent this is a kind of colonial kind of issue, where you want to exploit our labor and therefore you outsource everything to our country, and therefore you say that we will outsource, and then you produce everything here, correct? So that's either it is the whole thing of colonial, or it is like they just use it as an excuse that our labor laws are rigid.
Yeah, but if I juxtapose this to Aapko, Anusha, you worked with me for a couple of years, but now with Labour Line, I mean, you are getting complaints. Labor आपको फोन करते हैं, हमको ये नहीं मिल रहा, हमारे को wage theft हो रहा है, हमारा ये हो रहा है, and then you have this grievance redressal system. आप जोड़ते हो, मैनेजमेंट को नोटिस भेजते हो, हम CAJ में थे तो नोटिस भेजते थे, फिर all this में, do you really think that this kind of supporting individual labor grievances with this broader laws, are we making a difference? What stories, what kind of stories come to you and you feel angry, frustrated, कि क्या हो रहा है?
I think जो अभी बहुत recently हुआ, यहाँ आने से पहले 2 दिन पहले एक कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर, उनका 3,000 रुपये का क्लेम है. सुबह से लंच टाइम तक मीडिएशन गया सिर्फ 3,000 के लिए, एंड फिर भी सॉल्व नहीं हुआ है, क्योंकि जो थ्रेट ऑफ लॉ हम इस्तेमाल करते हैं सारे मीडिएशंस में, वो काम ही नहीं कर रहा है, क्योंकि ठेकेदार को तो पता है ये तो लेबर कोड तो नहीं जानने वाले हैं, गए तो फिर भी समय लगेगा, खींचेगा. सो द मैकेनिज्म्स दैट आर एक्चुअली सपोज्ड टू act as threats or like the stick that we use for pushing forward labor rights are in itself weak. So in a very recent piece that I had written for Live Law, I was analyzing past and previous labor laws, and whatever exclusions were built into the earlier labor laws have exacerbated in the codes. Like the example that Ernesto was giving earlier, thresholds for applicability have been increased, worker definitions have been diluted, social security is getting linked to, say, establishment-based or discretionary welfare-based instead of, being rights-based and universal. So, जितने भी complaints हमें मिल रहे हैं, we are actually facing the limits of being able to address them because the law is so designed in such a way to exclude the rights of informal and largely unorganized workers. Same goes for injury compensation claims also. जो कार्यस्थल पे जो दुर्घटना होती हैं उसके लिए जब हम compensation claims लेते हैं Employee Compensation Act के हिसाब से, जो कानून के हिसाब से उनको जो मुआवजा मिलनी चाहिए वो मान लीजिए वो 100 रुपये है, तो जो मीडिएशन की प्रोसेस में 40 या 50 तक ही हम पहुंच पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि जो सामने वाले जो ठेकेदार या मालिक है उनको भी पता है कि ये कितना लंबा खींचने वाले हैं. कोर्ट प्रोसेसेस आर riddled with inadequacies like not filling appointments. There is a very high pendency, and in this vacuum of the central rules still being drafted, it's like a nice rainy day for labor courts as well to take a step back and not decide on matters. So on multiple fronts precarity है. एक जो law की side पे, दूसरा because there is such a high level of unemployment which is exacerbated by lack of social security, मजदूरों को भी ये precarious situation से exit करने के लिए कोई cushion नहीं है. To highlight the scale of this, पिछले साल एक ब्रिकलिन में रेस्क्यू हुआ ILL के हिसाब से. एक चेन्नई में ब्रिकलिन में अराउंड लाइक 56 वर्कर्स वेयर रेस्क्यूड एंड उनकी रिहैबिलिटेशन प्रोसेस कर रहे थे हम. So in that Brooklyn, there were actually 15 more workers who refused to exit the place because when they migrate back to Odisha, despite the rescue, the opportunities available there are zero. So they would much rather be exploited for really abysmally low minimum wages in extremely exploitative conditions than go back to hunger. There are studies which also highlight this in a very tangible manner, like, if a bricklayer worker leaves a bonded labor situation, they have up to say 3 days of savings before they get back into the same system. So, because there is lack of universal social security, जितना भी ऐसा हम इंटरवेंशंस में जुड़ रहे हैं वो बैंडेड ही रहेगा. वो बहुत ज़रूरी है क्योंकि बैंडेड के बिना हम लंबा जो लड़ाई है वो लड़ नहीं पाएंगे. बैंडेड की ज़रूरत है, लेकिन जो लंबा लड़ाई क्या है वो भी हमें भूलना नहीं चाहिए.
आप जो कह रहे हैं वो रियलिटी और ये जो प्रोपेगेंडा है, इसमें आप क्या देखते हैं? क्योंकि ये जो कह रहे हैं कि ये होने वाला है, ये लेबर कोर्ट्स ये गारंटी करते हैं, इनफॉर्मल वर्कर्स को सोशल सिक्योरिटी के कवरेज में हम लोग लाए हैं, ये कह रहे हैं, लेकिन आप जो कह रहे हैं उसको पूरा के पूरा उसमें अंतर है. तो उसके ऊपर आपका क्या समझना है? खास तौर पे
आप ही कह दिया, अच्छा वर्ड प्रोपेगेंडा ही तो है. Because if we do a very clear-cut analysis of what the sections in the labor codes are, which many of them have been doing for a very long time, कि ये बहुत clear रूप से निकल कर आता है कि वो actually नहीं है. Because they are all discretionary welfare scheme based contingency linked benefits. But social security in itself, the conceptualization itself is not discretionary, it's a right. When we say a right, it means if I do not get it, there has to be a remedy. वरना वो wish है, वो right नहीं है.
But no, I think the same question to Ernesto in that sense. I mean, my point really is, I mean, you study this informal sector in a very, very big way. In the global space, where are we? You studied Bangladesh. I know you once did a case study there. India is still, I think, 80-90% informal. And then this labor code. Is there कुछ मिलता जुलता है कि it's getting worse?
So, as I said earlier, labor codes only accentuate precariousness. Now, I think the whole question of social security, earlier there was a lot of criticism of the government saying that you can't bring in labor reforms if you do not provide social security. Okay, so to address that question, basically they said social security for all. Now, there is also criticism, as Anusha is pointing out. But that's what they're trying to say, that, okay, we'll take flexibility, and give you social security. It's like a, kind of bargain that is. Yeah. Now, if you look at, global production networks and issues over there, we find that, no, I'm going beyond social security. There are industrial relations issues in global production networks. And sometimes there's pressure by the, the buyer firms, like, that to ensure certain labor standards over there. Now, the reasons why the buyer firms try to impose certain labor standards is because the consumer groups in the West put pressure on them. Okay, said, for example, the whole thing of Bangladesh, correct? And what happened in Bangladesh. So because of that, the buyer firms have become a little sensitive to these issues, but I would say that they are not. They are like they are not really, in some sense, interested in providing justice to labor, basically, correct? So a lot of the countries in the West, we were talking about the earlier question we raised about the labor standards in the West as compared to India. A lot of countries in the West have higher labor standards. They have collective bargaining rights. They have union, right to association and so on. But none of the, you take any global production network company, whether it's IT or whether you take, garments, none of them allow workers to form unions or form associations. Any attempt to form a union or an association, you will be, thrown out of the company, correct? So I don't know, when they are talking about, rights, labor rights or labor's organizing and right to form associations, I don't think the countries in the West or these buyer firms are really bothered about it. Okay, they are only bothered if there's an accident or suddenly their names or their reputations are on the line. Then they want to come and take action. But otherwise, I am not sure. They are interested in cheap labor and they do not want to invest in uplifting, production processes, okay, or invest in, invest in suppliers, improving their labor standards. Because improving labor standards, they think, is increasing labor cost.
So Anusha, because of the extensive field work that you are also engaged in terms of even simple thing, because awareness about even these changes that are happening with the labor rights and translating to labor codes, awareness among the labor as a whole. Gagan was mentioning about some of these portals like eShram, which at least promise something. Whether it translates into reality is another issue. What's been your direct field experience around each of these so-called provisions for bringing the informal labor into certain kind of a social security network?
I think a lot of our efforts, when I say we, I mean like civil societies or different labor interventions involved in labor work, we think the issue is limited to lack of awareness. But I think we can really trust people to know if there is actually benefit. Because if there is a benefit and if I am eligible and if I've seen people get it, it will reach me. To give a very small example, because of the ongoing LPG crisis, a lot of the hotels and small eateries have been ordered to be closed in Bangalore. It has led to a mass drive of migrant workers returning back home. One, because they are employed there, they are feeling very precarious about the next steps. Two, because they rely on cheap food to sustain themselves while working in these industrial hubs. So if social security is a reality, even if we look at COVID, if social security is actually a reality, then how do we explain these phenomenon? eShram itself was a response to the migrant workers, miseries and problems of migrant workers, PIL, in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court had directed that directed the government that there has to be a national database on unorganized workers, and attempts have to be made to gather data on the number of unorganized workers so that social security schemes can be provided. But Ishram at best just is data, and that is also largely skewed data, because there were massive drives undertaken by the labor departments at district levels to register workers before a particular deadline. We have been involved in trying to unlock benefits of e-Shram for workers as well, which is riddled with bureaucratic difficulties, and by the time we see even a single penny out of it, it's very, very long, and we don't see it translate into tangible benefits as well. Similarly, if we look at building and other construction workers welfare boards, or all these cess related welfare boards which are earmarked for that specific purposes, one, they have massive underutilization. Number two, because there are prolonged periods of underutilization, it's all despite being cess money, state government dips into it. And because there is lack of visibility in their utilization, public audit and accountability mechanisms, those dips also are not very visible to general public. And the Act also does not envisage checks and balances to ensure that there is proper utilization of BOCW rights.
But this BOCW, Ernesto, I want to open this can of worms, and we have worked a lot. Anusha and I worked a lot on that, trying to see how much of the fund there is, how many workers are actually registered, how much is lying, where is it lying in the government, where is it siphoned off, etc., etc. But when I talk to the companies, I say, damn it, you are paying for the BSCW fund. It's 1.5% of the cost of this thing. Why are you not bothered that it's your money and it's not being sent for your workers? And they say, yeah, kya hai? Project cost hai. It's a project cost. Mera magajmari kya karna? Now, therefore, the industry is also not bothered, even though they are coughing up. What's happening? I mean, what is this apathy?
There is apathy, basically.
Yeah, but I mean...
And maybe they are migrant workers. So, they are not going to be staying with me. So I'm really not bothered about them. That could be one of the reasons, because migrant workers basically are not embedded, correct, in society. And the less they are embedded, the more you can exploit. So maybe that's the reason why they are not really concerned about migrant workers, because they are here today, they'll be somewhere else tomorrow. And they are not seen as probably my workers or the permanent workers who are going to be with me for years together. So maybe they are not really, I think that's the reason maybe that apathy is there towards the migrant workers issue. And I think migrant worker issue, irrespective of countries, all migrant workers, I think, suffer in the same way, though the degrees may vary depending on your knowledge and all that, but the issues may be the same, that they are just disembedded from the context in which they work. And therefore, I think not the employers care and nor does the state care for the migrant workers. So embedding them maybe will be one way out of this issue where, they have some say in what's happening at the place they work.
Ernesto, I've been listening to you now for some time, and I know you. Are you, after so many years, you're still passionate. You're still angry. What's the trigger? What keeps you going? What's the history that you're so engaged in this?
Very difficult to go back and see what's the trigger, but I remember that in my second year of college, my economics professor asked people around, what are you planning to do in life, in future? And I was quite clear that it has to do something with labor. It was very clear. I don't know from where that came, but it could be related to what I saw when growing up. Say, I think it was the we used to live in the railway colony. So 1974, I think 1974 railway strike, correct? And that's the time I saw medical officers being sent to people's houses, because everybody had reported sick. Okay, it was like mass sick leave. Okay, and all the employees were running helter-skelter because they knew that the doctor would be coming to their place, hiding here, hiding there. And also, you saw a lot of the wives of these employees going and garlanding the drivers, for example, who were driving the trains and did not go on strike. With garlanding in the sense they had these garlands made of shoes, which they went and garlanded them. Like, since we were staying near the station, we often saw that this also women getting involved and the wives getting involved in the entire strike. So maybe those memories, linger on, and that's the reason why, you still see, that, there are still injustices that labor faces. In spite of that, that was a massive strike. And things have, just got worse for labor.
So, Anusha, what about you? What you're young and you could have taken so many with the kind of opportunity that exists in the world today. You're trained as a lawyer. You could have made a successful legal career. What made you do what you do?
I think if I have to think about very early seeds of inspiration, it was basically because of where I grew up. So my parents still are there, and I'm from north of Chennai, which is a highly industrialized area. So Manali, Tiruvattriyur, Ernaur, you see a lot of heavy chemicals, heavy industries there. So I think 10th standard, there was a project to sort of see the difference between how in what soil plant grows better, what are the conditions in which plants grow better. The project happened because one of my classmates dropped out of school, and that was because of lead contamination in the soil in the area, because of the thermal power stations there, because of the multiple issues in my area actually, like fly ash pollution, lead contamination in groundwater as well as soil, which had an impact on the agricultural produce there, and it was very, very palpable, the effects of it. So, and then I think that sort of exposed me at a very young age to the effects of industrialization that came at the cost of people. And that was like a first seed of inspiration that I remember. Then eventually in college, things got shaped with like a different human rights internships. And then when I graduated, it was COVID crisis. So it felt like I can't do anything but do this.
Yeah. And I spent all my life working in rural areas. But it was the COVID time that we jumped in when we saw that thousands of
Exodus,
migrants,
literally the exodus of migrants. Yeah.
then moved into the social compact and, saying that the state is totally ineffective. And we were always in a versus thing with the market, and said, now I think maybe it's time to talk to them because they seem to be more powerful. And but then we got into this whole thing of gig work. And today we do a lot of work with gig workers and help companies develop their wellness policies. But what is the labor codes and gig work? What is the precarity there? I mean, that's going to be the order of the day. When we did a survey on who are the gig workers, 30-40% are graduates, engineers. What's happening? Employment is not there. Gig work they're not workers. What's your analysis of that, Ernesto? Where are we heading? Is that the order of the day globally also? And India, I think even Anusha has some experience on working with gig work. But how do you see it? I mean, We need to legitimize it more.
Well, it only adds to precariousness. At least that's what I would think. It is, the labor codes are, are creating precariousness, and this gig work only adds to it. Even the, looking at the Social Security Code, which talks about gig workers, it does not really, it treats them as independent contractors and really does not treat them as employees of the, of the platform. Now, at least from what I can see, is that the gig workers could be employees of platforms simply because who controls their work and who directs their work. A control and direction, I think, coming from the platform itself. For example, the worker, if he wants to work on the platform, first has to register himself at the platform, then has to agree to the terms and conditions of the platform. Okay. Then, if once he's on the platform, he or she cannot, refuse any requests from the clients. The fees are fixed by the platform. Okay. Then the customer gives feedback, okay, on the gig worker to the platform. And the gig worker cannot have any relationship, or the relationship between the customer or the client and the gig worker is reduced to minimal. Okay? And penalties are imposed on gig workers through the platform. So who controls? Finally, the platform controls the work of the gig worker. I would think that they could be considered employees of the platform. And once they're considered employees of the platform, a lot of things could change in their favor. Though at the moment, nothing has been done to look at them as, employees of the platform.
एक ऐसा आर्गुमेंट भी है कि गिग वर्क कम से कम लोगों को कुछ काम दे रहा है. ये जो आर्गुमेंट है, वो काम नहीं होगा तो उनको भूखा मरना पड़ेगा. तो क्या आप लोगों का सवाल क्या है, क्या प्रॉब्लम है आपको? वो गिग वर्क में वो काम करना कि नहीं करना, उसको रजिस्टर करना है वो प्लेटफॉर्म पे कि नहीं करना, वो तो इंडिविजुअल चॉइस है. ऐसे एक आर्गुमेंट है. आपने जो ब्रिकलिन वर्कर्स के बारे में बताया कि चॉइस है कि वो कंडीशन में काम करे या तो जाकर हंगर को फेस करे. तो ये बहुत सारे गिग वर्क के बारे में जितने भी अभी पीसेस में पढ़े हैं, इसमें दोनों आर्गुमेंट्स आ रहे हैं. जो आप एक आर्गुमेंट दे रहे कि दे शुड बी लेजिटिमेटली कंसिडर्ड एज एम्प्लॉइज ऑफ द प्लेटफॉर्म, और दूसरे बाजू में कि वो चॉइस है, नहीं करना है तो नहीं कर सकता है, उनको नहीं करना है तो नहीं कर सकता है. उसमें मैं समझना चाहूंगा कि आप दोनों इसको कैसे काउंटर करते हैं.
बहुत गुस्सा आ रहा है सवाल से ही. बट आई थिंक द फ्रेमिंग इज ऑल्सो बिकॉज इनइक्वालिटी इज often framed as an inevitable thing, but it's not. Inequality is made. So यहाँ पर भी जो flexibility कहते हैं, जिसकी basis पे workers को independent contractors या self-employed जब कहते हैं, they are all very limited way of defining worker. If we look at the history of labor struggles also, कौन मजदूर, the definition of mazdoor itself has been a long-standing site of political and legal contestation. So यहाँ पर भी वही है जैसे कि अभी अर्नेस्टो ने भी बताया कि उनके सारे working conditions और उनके wages, सारी चीज़ें is determined by an employer. So in that situation, how is it fair to categorize them as people who are doing this by choice or like by out of their own volition? स्विगी जोमेटो या जितने भी प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स हैं, बोथ ट्रांसपोर्ट एंड उबर, ओला, रैपिडो जो भी हैं, इन सारे प्लेटफॉर्म्स में बहुत सारे लोग ये फुल टाइम करते हैं, 5-6 साल से कर रहे हैं. देर आर पीपल हु डू इट ऑन एंड ऑफ, बट देर आर पीपल हु आर डूइंग इट ऑन अ लॉन्गर टर्म बेसिस. सो क्या 5 साल से ज़्यादा ये फुल टाइम कर रहे हैं, उनके लिए ग्रेचुइटी है, क्या उनके लिए PF है? सो I think the question has to be flipped a bit and this whole element of choice जो कह रहे हैं जिनकी बेसिस पे उनके एम्प्लॉयमेंट स्टेटस एज इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स आर गेटिंग डिफाइंड, उसको हमें प्रॉब्लमेटाइज करके थोड़ा और क्रिटिकली स्क्रूटनाइज करने की ज़रूरत है.
It's not only about getting a job. One also has to look at the quality of the job. अब क्वालिटी को छोड़कर आप बोलो कि हम लोग जॉब प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं, तो कोई मेहरबानी नहीं कर रहे, आप भी प्रॉफिट कमा रहे हैं आउट ऑफ इट. एंड बेसिकली यू आर taking the profits for yourself rather than distributing it in terms of wages. ठीक है. So there's some kind of exploitation that is happening out there where, a lot of profit for the companies, though they have also put in a lot of money because of the huge discounts they give. But over a period of time, one should also see improvement in the wages of workers. For example, when the company starts, the gig company, whichever you take, they give a lot of, they want workers, so they entice them with better wages. But as the time goes, unke wages are declining. So us time par theek tha, you were ready to pay higher wages. But now the wages have declined. So it's more of the decline rather than improvement of wages, improvement in terms of also the dearness allowance that should be added to those wages. Because inflation is so high. अब inflation में लोग इतने high inflation में, how will people survive? ठीक है. So that means you're saying you die, correct? We won't pay you, correct? So that is one issue. The other is the autonomy of these workers. They say they are autonomous, they can withdraw, but they have to work extra hard to make a living. ठीक है. So if you are saying कि autonomy की बात नहीं है यहाँ पर. I have to put in those hours. If I don't put in those hours, you will throw me out of the platform. ठीक है. I have to put in, for example, also in terms of online platforms, correct? जो online labor market में, there people have to put in a lot of hours to see their reputation, to maintain their reputation so that they can get work. If your reputation is not good, the platform will throw you out. ठीक है, आपका reputation नहीं है ठीक, तो आपको job नहीं मिलेगा. ठीक है. So if you are saying that I have control, no, I don't have control. The issue is of control. आप मुझे control कर रहे हैं, correct? And therefore I need, as per, the control mechanism that I am an employee and therefore I require those benefits. You cannot say that you should not get you have the autonomy. That's the whole argument कि भाई precarious करो. Autonomy, we'll say that in terms of autonomy है, okay? There's flexibility for you. In that process, you try to, exploit my labor power in that sense.
Just want to add on to what Ernesto is saying in terms of how the labor codes also incentivize fragmentation of production units. Because there is a threshold-based applicability, they do not want to employ that number of workers because they'll come under the purview of law. If we look at BD making, largely women are employed from home-based workers. They are not self-employed because their production, their targets, their payment, everything is directly linked to the targets of a establishment.
Most of these gig works are urban phenomena. They're not rural phenomena. Rural phenomena, piecework. That's the way urban governance and cities are not factoring in their design to handle social security for gig workers. And one of the two things we are talking of at one stage, for example, दोपहर में, in the afternoon, 12 बजे, 1 बजे, there are no shelters for, gig workers where they can get clean drinking water, maybe cheap food. So that's an urban design phenomenon. We just can't leave it to the platform and this thing. Ultimately, they're serving the city. So is the city responsible to design itself that this is the order of the day? We were talking and we recommended to one of the gig work platform we were talking of, set up their cooperatives where there is some form of collectivization and therefore social security through this thing, health, and both invest in it. The city invests in it. So we have left the city and urban governance as if they are not responsible at all when they are actually serving the city. So I'm just bringing that dimension in. We don't talk of that. And should we or not? And therefore, urban policy में gig work का जगह भी है कि नहीं? When thousands and thousands of urban slum dwellers are gig workers. I mean,
So in that sense, the question that when we asked is, are they citizens or of the
it's a
city?
bigger question.
Correct. Now, I would think that at least from the policy or what is done for them is so minimal that it doesn't feel that I am a citizen of the city, correct? Or who I am a part of the city.
And those micro aspects of what is happening to Dalits, Muslims, women, and discrimination in this sector.
Correct. Absolutely.
You see, don't send a, do you want a Muslim to come to your doorstep?
Correct. Yeah.
It's
थोड़ा मुझे पीछे क्योंकि about 20 years back I was quite engaged with this what is called Naka workers. That's a big phenomenon, right? So Naka workers, it was like a people's platform. एक नाके पे सब अलग अलग स्किल सेट के लोग खड़े होते थे. एक कॉन्ट्रैक्टर आता था, वो बोलता था कि मुझे 2 कारपेंटर चाहिए, 2 गवंडी चाहिए. हम लोगों की वो की डिमांड ये थी कि नाका वर्कर्स के लिए शेल्टर्स होने चाहिए ताकि वो दे डोंट हैव टू स्टैंड इन द स्कॉर्चिंग सन. उनके लिए पानी होना चाहिए. Those are the demands of that time. तो तू जो बात कर रहा है, तो that reality is a different reality with a onslaught of platforms. It's a different, but nature of the thing is actually fundamentally the same. तो अभी क्या देखते हैं कि Gagan, I don't know what to the link.
I think that's the polarity that we are caught in. तुम वो करोगे, you are legitimizing. But it's a reality. So should you move up and build a coalition? And therefore, what is civil society doing about all this? The role of civil society comes in this. We are also just entitlement में लगे हैं. When we are not sort of being the bridge between state, market, communities, that role civil society is not playing. We are also gig workers, delivery of services.
Anyway, we would like to hear from you in terms of how you see this evolution.
At least the Naka workers, most of them are migrant again. Okay, so city doesn't have any interest in them. Gig workers, I would also think quite number of them may be migrants. So the city doesn't care for them, at least that's what I would think. Because they just, are seen, if they are just meant to be, their labor needs to be extracted and then they need to go back rather than, settle them in the city. If they settle in the city, I would think they may be in a position to demand their rights. Exactly, they would have a stake. But I don't think that's what the city actually wants.
Yeah, but Ernesto, you do a lot of research. Are there researches on these issues? And should they be there? And community-based research. That space is not covered by academia.
Correct. So I would think that more and more collaboration with community-based organizations and academics should take place. And, work, so that the research that is done would be relevant to community-based organizations. As well as I sometimes tell my students in class that, probably do something like that which would make sense to the community. As well as you can, sometimes academic research likes to theorize. But theorization is also important for community-based organizations. And what is the problem with theorization? So you need to theorize because that's where you need to, that's the inputs that you're going to give them, and that's what is going to drive action. So this whole distinction between academics and community-based or any organization for that matter does not really exist, I would think. So more there is a collaboration, the better your research and the more effective you are also in creating kind of options for people. Yeah.
Just one thing I was thinking while this whole thing of urban governance came up was this something that we observed in our work in Malanpur as well. We see industrial development and smaller villages, getting developed into these industrial complexes. At least if a particular area is categorized as a village or a taluka, we can demand for things like PHC क्यों नहीं है यहाँ पे, आंगनवाड़ी क्यों नहीं है. Although the process is longer, at least on paper these are civic amenities that we can fight for. But when an area gets converted into, say, a special economic zone or an industrial area, despite the population being much larger, fighting for basic civil necessities like water or PHCs, health services, is a suspended space of governance. Where do I even go to ask for इतने किलोमीटर रेडियस में क्यों एक पब्लिक हेल्थ सेंटर नहीं है, प्राइमरी हेल्थ सेंटर नहीं है या स्कूल नहीं है. बट दीज आर प्लेसेस वेयर workers spend decades together. They bring their families. So in terms of urban governance, what are these suspended areas of governance जहाँ पे लोग हैं फिर भी वहाँ basic necessities के लिए acknowledged rights नहीं है.
हम 3-4 साल से इंडस्ट्री एसोसिएशन वी आर बैंगिंग अहेड फॉर दिस कोलैबोरेटिव दिस थिंग. आई थिंक वी नीड other stakeholders to join that process. Otherwise, it's just becoming civil society, trade association. They are only bothered about their interests. We are bothered. I think what you said, Ernesto, rings a lot of meaning to me. And we've been having earlier conversations with other people on the panel. Somewhere we are lacking this collective space where different stakeholders come and talk about critical issues and different actors say we can contribute this way. I think that's missing.
लेबर मूवमेंट का भविष्य क्या है, सिर्फ इंडिया में नहीं, ग्लोबली, क्योंकि सभी जगह यूनियंस के ऊपर बहुत सारा अटैक है. इट्स नॉट ओनली इन इंडिया, एवरीवेयर यू सी दैट अटैक हैपनिंग, राइट. और खास तौर पे जहां जहां एक पर्टिकुलर आइडियोलॉजी के गवर्नमेंट्स आए हैं वहां तो बहुत ज्यादा उसके ऊपर दमन आ रहा है. कोई कोई देशों में यूरोप के सोशल डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट्स होंगे, लेबर के गवर्नमेंट होंगे, तो भी ऑनस्लॉट है. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि पहले एक था कि भाई ये टाइप का गवर्नमेंट होगा तो वो लेबर के लिए सपोर्टिव होगा. ऐसा जो एक लिंक था वो लिंक भी टूट गया है. तो आप क्या देखते हैं कि भारतवर्ष में लेबर मूवमेंट का इतिहास क्या है, और इतिहास यानी भविष्य क्या है, और ग्लोबली आप क्या समझते हैं? तो इसमें 2-3 मैं सभी समझ कि ट्रेड यूनियन एज अ फॉर्म ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजिंग, उसका भी रिलेवेंस कितना है, नहीं है, उसमें क्या बदलाव होने की जरूरत है. तो अल्टीमेटली a form of organizing is to impact, to bring that cause to the forefront so that we can have some solutions on it. If the form is not working for that purpose, do we need to relook at the form? That kind of thing. So people have done some experimentation about, women's collectives, labor collectives, all those kinds of, but not that they have created any great advances in those areas of actually, gaining the rights and protecting the rights of the labor. तो वो सब कॉन्टेक्स्ट देखकर आप दोनों का क्या पर्सपेक्टिव है, कि क्या लगता है?
think global trends, where are we headed, utna I don't feel very equipped to answer that. But in terms of trade union ki roles kya hai, and in terms of what the vision forward should be like, we need some immediate economic gains to be able to fight a larger fight. So if I am working for 12 hours a day, आपने शायद पानीपत जो इंडियन ऑयल पेट्रोलियम वर्कर्स का स्ट्राइक अभी जो भी चल रहा है उसका देखा हुआ आपने, कि despite guaranteed loss, there still needs organizing for extremely basic rights like 8-hour working, Saturday या Sunday एक दिन 7 दिन में एक दिन छुट्टी. So उस इमीडिएट गेन्स के लिए डेफिनेटली इकोनॉमिक गेन्स के लिए बहुत ज़रूरत है ट्रेड यूनियंस, बट लार्जर स्ट्रगल डेमोक्रेटिक स्ट्रगल्स में ट्रेड यूनियंस का एक बहुत सिग्निफिकेंट रोल है. रिसेंटली एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री देखा मैंने, ना पासरेन करके. बेसिकली इट्स अ मूवी अबाउट स्कॉटिश वर्कर्स who put on a 4-year fight, struggle, saying that they will not repair Rolls-Royce fighter planes that were actually serving the Chilean government between 1974 and 78. And that had a great impact on the people there, because it basically stopped with this 4-year strike of the workers, ensured that thousands of people were not actually getting killed. So workers and trade unions, apart from being involved in immediate economic gains, are also great stakeholders in terms of the larger fight against fascism. So in terms of future visioning और अभी के लिए हमारा काम कैसा होना चाहिए, ये दोनों पक्ष पे काम चल रहा है और वैसे ही चलने की भी ज़रूरत है.
I agree with what Gagan is saying, that that trade unions in some countries are on a decline, and also in India to that effect. But there have been places, like for example Sweden, Belgium, where trade unions are still strong. So it's not that trade unions everywhere are declining. They are declining in some places, but are on the decline for whatever reasons, as well as improving or are strong enough in other regions. Now, with regard to our context, I would think that any form of collective, I'm using the word collective, would be great, correct, at this context, point of time. It not necessarily be a trade union, it can be any form of collective. And any form of collective would be in a position to resist, would be great. Okay, otherwise what workers are doing is basically resigning and pushing off to a next organization. So it's just, without resolving their issues, they just move on from one organization to the other. Okay, and that also can be seen as a form of resistance. Okay, rather than, because they, for example, they don't have a union, they just move on, correct? And this happens both in the, garment sector, for example, or it could also happen in the IT sector, which is very prominent in the IT. You just move on and go on.
So coming back to you, Anusha, you're saying, you're giving the example of the Chilean war and the role played in terms of halting some of those pieces by the Scottish workers. Today, when I talk to some of the filmmakers and others in India, they say even the progressive trade unions are not very open to showing issues which bring out the communal issues, and which, because they are afraid that they will lose their membership if we bring out some of those kinds of films and show and use them to train workers. So when you're saying workers fighting for economic gain but also having a long-term perspective of what building of the democracy, part of that process, आज के इंडिया में वो रियलिटी क्या है सच्चाई में?
Which includes caste.
Yeah, religion, all those issues come into the play.
Are we so divided, and the division that the instrument is actually a divisive instrument? Caste groups. So, and also challenge you there also. Collectives of caste agree, but they don't become workers. They're looking at discrimination, social. It's getting very complex. And how do we therefore, what's the form that will work?
And you can add the complexity, bringing in the whole gender dimension, the sexuality dimension, trans, all those kinds of issues also are now coming into the play in any form of organizing. And then all the assertions of different identities, are they uniting or are they fragmenting? Let's face some of these issues frontally. That's what, just want to, we don't have necessarily answers, but let's at least talk about that. These are the realities that we are facing today.
I think the first example that comes to my mind is of the most recent farmers movement. If we look at the farmers' movement, there have been very clear examples of unity between Mazdoor and farmer. When we say Mazdoor, it's mostly landless Dalit agricultural laborers who work on a wages, daily wages or like monthly wages basis. So there are obviously, I think, when we are fighting fighting forces of oppression, even within the collective spaces, those struggles will exist. So I think they influence each other and they have to be taken in tandem. Even while organizing for a particular democratic right, all axes of oppression like gender, caste, class will be definitely in play. How do we address both things simultaneously is the challenge, right? So there are examples where very positive examples where this disunity has been broken towards a larger goal. And the most recent one being the farmers movement, in which large landowners and Mazdoors came together at Tikri border and fought against the oppressive farm laws. It's along the same lines during the British Raj. If we look, different people from different classes of the society came together to fight, while at the same time the fight against existing forms of vulnerabilities. So I think increasing diversity in participation, bringing together multiple vulnerabilities together is a critical thing to do in the collectivization process.
I would think there are some initiatives to look at class and identities together. Okay, so you marry class with caste, for example, and or with other ethnicity. So there are attempts now by unions, at least in India, some of the unions are trying to look at this. How do we look at the whole universal thing of class and then look at each one's identity and adapt according to those identities. Now that is a very complex process. But if I go back, I can remember that, in the Bombay Dock Labour Board, for example, you had this union called the Transport and Dock Workers Union. S.R. Kulkarni and others were part of it. There were people from different castes, different religions, different regional groups, and yet they were the strongest union. How did they do it? Maybe that's some of the answers could lie in that. Because they had identity issues over there, and I remember each one had a separate leader. But overall, the decisions were made together, correct, with all those leaders. So you had Marathi-speaking people, you had the people from MP, you had people from, UP, okay? And each one was doing different work. But still, the union was one of the strongest. So it's not that you cannot overcome these things, but how probably you need to think back or look at examples from the past which may help you to build a stronger union.
Yeah. Anyway, I think let's look ahead. And AI is coming. I don't know how it's going to impact organizing. I already, these NACA meetings are getting a problem, getting attention of workers. We try to do that, and they come out and they're on reels. Or the gig work is all based on AI, individualizing the thing, not allowing collectivization. So that's a big area which is coming. I don't know, Ernesto, you're studying the impact because the governments are bothered about AI and how it is impacting various, configuration. Have you thought about that? AI and labor, what's going to happen? Jobs are going to go. I don't know. Everybody's concerned.
Yeah, in a way, some jobs are going to go for sure. And there are some jobs which are, more sensitive to AI. And if, for example, IT, also, like the whole thing of software engineers, they are going to be impacted by AI. But some of the jobs may not get impacted, like healthcare and something like janitors. Those kind of jobs may not get impacted as such. Yeah, AI
But are there
is.
some studies done in the future of work on this with AI? Is there some?
Yeah, there
There
could be
could
some.
be,
Yeah, there may be
know,
some studies done on.
But I think we should look at that at some stage.
Like closing statements from both of you in terms of looking at the next decade. What are the few critical things that you would aspire that would help the cause of the labor?
I think just maybe tailing off from what I had said earlier is what stands in my memory afresh. In terms of what civil society organizations do, I think an important thing that we should be very conscious of while working for labor rights is to fight against the commodification of labor rights work. A lot of the work that we do is largely determined by a very specific donor logic in terms of outputs or in terms of a very issue specific work. But I think we have to resist against that in the work that we do. Just because we are working on, say, social security doesn't mean that the special intensive revision of voters and disenfranchisement does not concern us. So working in silos also sort of keeps us away from the larger issues that actually have a very direct everyday impact on, say, even the particular constituency that we work with. So not losing sight of that is definitely an important thing to keep in mind for civil society organizations working with labor rights. And also, how can, like Ernesto was saying, how can we come together as collectors? How can we create more convening spaces? How can we organize better? Because the kind of repression that we are facing today is so high. For how can we stand in solidarity with other worker movements? I think it's important for us to assess what possibilities exist in the work that we do and also the limitations, but at the same time keep pushing the scope of the possibilities in the work that we do in terms of labor protection. So yeah, but if you have to ask me if I am hopeful, I think none of us have the luxury of not being hopeful. So,
Well
yeah.
put, yeah. I always say hope is the only thing that nobody can take it away from you other than when you decide to give it up.
Yeah, so I would think there are certain challenges that the labor movement and labor will face or likely to face. One is the whole thing of precariousness. I see at the moment, I don't see any end to it. Okay. So that is one major issue that the labor movement as well as labor will face. The other issue is about, the whole issue of which we have not spoken about is the whole issue of just transition that would happen, correct? So if we are moving away from coal, then and issues of climate, okay? So then labor in the next, coming decade, it has to be facing this issue of just transition and how just it is going to be for labor. That's a major issue that will come up, correct? That's something. And then the whole thing about data and the control of data. Can labor gain control of the data, okay? Can labor demand for algorithmic transparency, okay? So those are the issues, I think, which
New challenges. Yeah.
new challenges will come up and which we'll have to, labor will have to tackle.
Yeah, I'm taking back the core of what I think you've been saying, all of you, that somewhere a multi-stakeholder, at a certain critical geographic or thematic level, people coming together to think through. I think this market has siloed us, and human beings also siloed us. I think somewhere love, compassion, empathy, I think we are losing that is part of the silos. Gujarati mein hum bole the maru su ne mare su, what's in it for me and what. I think somewhere there we have to bring those values back. So But thank you, Ernesto, Anusha, for this conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope the viewers find it meaningful. Just ask these questions rather than always have answers. I think we need to.
Yeah. So how do we rekindle this aspect of solidarity? That's the key thing. I think is what we have reflected through this 1.5 hour conversation. So let's keep moving in that direction of building, rebuilding, recalibrating solidarity across all those who are being oppressed and suppressed, so that we can look at a better future. So thank you both of you
Yes.
for joining us.
Thank you
very
for
much.
inviting
We have
us.
unmuted
Yeah, thank you so much.
some aspect.
Thank you for having us.